I was left in that setting, and I didn't know what to do. I mean, everything in the room reminded me of Dave and the situation, and I was filled with guilt about the situation. I'll talk more about that later on, because guilt never healed anybody. You'll hear me say that over and over, and it certainly doesn't help grief at all. Welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Let me just tell you a little bit about this presentation and why I did it. I have the belief that the vast majority of people that need help in grief just don't seek help in grief. And I have to make it easy. I want to make a presentation that they would actually listen to, that you can listen to in your home. And you can read this little grief booklet, and it's the beginning. It's the conversation piece. Now, when I first did this presentation, I thought churches would want to hear from me. Churches would want to hear from me. Well, I've done it 3 times in churches, once for Father Fred, and 7 times in jail. I developed a jail presentation is what I did. And I remember once I was in the Grand Traverse jail, and this young man came up after me and started talking to me, and he says, he's talking about everything jail, his drug addiction, the problems he has. This all started when I was 10 and my mom died. And then he told me where he grew up, in Peaceful Valley, right next to this church. A 10-year-old grieving across the street. I thought, this is why we got to do that, right? And his grief had come out, and many people that grieve, and they grieve inappropriately, will come out as anger. It will come out as addiction. Grief will make you have a response. And sometimes it'll even come out as sickness. And I did this. I was at a funeral that I was invited to be part of, and the fella had been working cleaning airplanes. That was his job when they would come in, and he had a sudden onset heart attack while he was doing his job in the airplane. The individual in the airplane cleaning as well was a young girl, and she immediately went to his attention and started doing CPR, trying to help him, trying to save his life. And I asked, where's the girl at the funeral? I want to talk to her. And I started talking to her, and she told me about what happened, and immediately I had like a grief response. I just started crying with her, and she's probably, what is this pastor crying about? Well, I have a nightmare that never leaves me. When I was in college at 18 years of age, I was a partier, a troublemaker. I know that's hard to believe when you look at me now. Anyway, I had no purpose, no goals, none when I was a freshman in college. I had actually gotten into a fist fight with my first semester roommate. This is back in 1977, when you don't go to jail for getting in a fist fight with your roommate, right? And they, at the college I went to, had suggested you probably shouldn't be roommates, and suggested that I go find another room and a new roommate, which I did. His name was Dave. Dave and I had been friends in high school, and he was a lifeguard along with me, and I love Dave, and I was glad to be accepted into a new room setting. Second semester, 2 weeks in, Dave comes to me and says, man, I am feeling terrible. I think I got the flu. And I'm like, oh, you got the flu. And he says, fact of it, I don't think I can walk back to the room. We're 18. Who's got the flu? Or so I thought. I took him back to our dorm room. He was on the top bunk. I was on the bottom bunk. Turned off the lights. He was moaning and groaning. I put up a bucket for him to throw up. I thought, man, the poor guy's going to throw up. It's going to be a terrible time. And another fellow came into the room. He turned on the light, and he said, what's wrong with Dave? He's blue. I hopped up on the bunk bed, and my roommate had died. We dragged him off the bunk bed. I started CPR. By the way, we had learned CPR together, right? But we had never used it. We had never had a critical incident as lifeguards together. But now I'm trying to save the other lifeguard, right? And I can't remember anything, literally at all. Is it 2 compressions and 5 breaths, or is it 2 breaths and 5 compressions? The amount of confusion and tears and whatnot, and I remember him throwing up in the panic of the situation, and the other fellow had come in. This is way before cell phones. He'd gone for help, and then eventually the fire department showed up. It felt like 100 years, but they eventually came, took over the situation. One of those volunteer firemen get me in the corner, and they go, "Hey, Tim," the kid, he called me kid, he didn't know my name, "Kid, don't get your hopes up." And my roommate died of a heart attack at 18 years of age. I was left alone in a room. This is before there was counselors or chaplains or whatnot on this campus. I was left alone in a room where nobody would move in with me, because that's where somebody died, right? And I was left in that setting, and I didn't know what to do. I mean, everything in the room reminded me of Dave and the situation, and I was filled with guilt about the situation. I'll talk more about that later on, because guilt never healed anybody. You'll hear me say that over and over, and it certainly doesn't help grief at all. You know, I didn't know what to do. I had gone to the funeral. I felt guilty the whole time. Did I kill my roommate? Why didn't I call 911? Why didn't I ask for help immediately? Why didn't I see that he was having a heart attack and didn't have the flu? Those questions went through my brain over and over and over again. In this booklet that I gave you, there's a paragraph I want to read to you. One good outcome from my guilt was that I repented of my self-absorbed lifestyle. It did turn me towards God. That doesn't always happen with the grief process. I told God that I was willing to do anything that He asked. A few weeks later, I began my lifelong service to God as a youth leader in a Spanish-speaking church in downtown Grand Rapids. And I had a deep concern for the grieving and heartbroken ever since that awful winter day. It began my love for Spanish people too. By the way, I still go to Guatemala and elsewhere. Can't speak a word of Spanish, but I love Spanish food and Spanish people. In what God is doing in the Latin community. Dave's death sent me on a quest to study grief. I was pushed by sorrow and shame to become a hospital chaplain, and later sought a master's degree in ministry with grief counseling project. As a young hospital chaplain, I observed every kind of local pastor, priest, church elder in action as they responded to congregational sorrow and tragedy. Some responses were gentle, loving, tearful. Others were judgmental and blunt. I often felt embarrassed because of the misguided counsel and thoughtless words of my fellow clergy. And I'm going to learn how to turn a page. There we go. As a pastor, chaplain, spiritual caregiver, I've often been in homes, hospice houses, and hospital rooms as dearly loved ones are dying, and I wept over friends. I wept with my family. I've never claimed to be like Jesus because I'm often self-absorbed and sinful. However, in Isaiah 53, the Messiah is described as a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And I understand this Jesus.